Okay, so let's talk about how we're going to go about writing our program. I always recommend you start with new py, and it's going to be called gashlycrum.py. And our program needs to run like this. So it needs to have a -f, and that's going to be some input file, one or more of those, and it also needs to accept a positional argument of some letters. So let's open up our program, and we're going to call it the Gashlycrum. Change that to something informative. And there's going to be a positional argument that's going to be a letter. Actually, it's going to be more than one letter. And we're going to say inargs is equal to plus. So this is exactly what we did in the picnic argument, in the picnic program. It's going to be letters. And it's one or more, so I'll say letters like that. And I'm going to change the metavar to say letter, so that when we run this with the help, it'll be a little more obvious to the user what that means. We don't need these arguments, but we are going to need a -f or -- file. That's what I call them by default because it's a pretty common argument name in many command line programs. So this needs to be readable, a readable file. So it will be the input file, we might call it. The metavirus file. This needs to be a readable file. We saw this from the WC program, and the default is going to be our gashlycrum.txt file, which does exist right here in this directory. So this should work. So here I'm going to change this. I'm going to say, for instance, print args.letters, and let's just see what we get. Now we can run our program. Gashlycrum. Let's run it with no arguments, and we should see a decent help here where it shows that what we want is an optional file. We know it's optional because this occurs in square brackets, and then we want a positional argument of letter followed by maybe more than one letter. We can run it with -h and see the logger help. That looks pretty nice. Very professional looking documentation for our program. And what we want to actually do is we're going to print the letters. So for instance, if I give it A and B, it shows me a list. I know it's a list because it occurs in square brackets, and there's A and B, the two characters that I put in here. If I say foo and bar, it's also going to show me those, which are not going to be valid inputs, but that's okay. Right now we're just accepting one or more strings. So that's good. So let's start off by, instead of printing our letters, let's say for letter in args.letters, we can print the letter on each individual line. And let's run it like that. So running with input A and B, it's going to print A and B. So that's pretty good. We know we're going to have to iterate over each of the letters and get the value from our lookup file for that letter. So how do we do that? So let's talk about how we're going to iterate over each line in the input file. So we're going to have an argument that's going to be called args.file. It's going to be file because that's the long name of the parameter that we defined. So there's going to be something called args.file. And if we print that, it's going to do its best to show us something that represents an open file handle. That defaulted to gashlycrum.txt, which is a readable file, and so therefore argparse opened the file for us, and args.file is no longer the file name, but the file handle. So if I give this, for instance, the alternate.txt, it's going to show me that as the file as best it can. So it's putting this in angle brackets, and it's showing me that it's a text IO wrapper. It's saying that its name is alternate.txt, which is the name of the file I gave it. It was opened in for reading mode, and the text encoding is UTF-8. So it's showing me what it can for something that's abstract like a file handle, but you get the idea. Rather than printing the file, I want to be able to print each line of the file. So for line in args.file, we saw this from the word count program. This is how you iterate over the lines in a file handle. So I could print, for instance, the line. Let me just run that with my alternate.txt, and it's going to print each of those lines. Now we saw this in the word count too, where those lines are defined by the fact that they have a new line character occurring at the end. And when we iterate over them in this way, those new lines are not removed. So the line has a new line at the end, and then print adds another new line. So if I don't want that, I can say end equals to the empty string. And if I run that again, that is the input, that is the text of the alternate.txt file. So what I want you to think about here is, instead of printing each of the lines in the file, I want you to create a lookup. I can just call it lookup here. That's going to be a dictionary. So we could either do that, create that an empty dictionary either with empty curly brackets, or you can say dict paren dict as the function. Either one of those will create an empty dictionary. Rather than printing the line, I want you to think about how could you get the first character of that line, use that as a key, and then set a key in lookup to the value of the line itself. And then when you go through the letters in args letters, how could you look up to see, does that letter occur in your lookup table? And if it does, you'll print the line of text from the file. And if it does not occur, then you're supposed to print, I think it's something like, I don't know 8. Yes, so here given the character 8, it looks up in it runs in the program, and it says, I do not know 8. So here's a string diagram that just generally shows you that given some letter, or letters, and some file, you're going to print the lines from that file starting with that letter. So that should be enough to get you going. See if there were any other hints here. I've already recommended you start with new py. We've talked about how to use inargs to define the positional arguments. We've talked about how to use the file type, the argparse file type. I suggest you use a dictionary. You'll get that file as a file handle, which you can read line by line. And you need to get that first character and figure out how you can look it up. So that is what you're supposed to do, and I'll see you in the next video for the solution.